Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to Cool's Interviews. As you can see, today we are joined by Gary, who himself is a host of a podcast, so I'm sure we can chat about that, but he has quite a bit different topics as well as an NDA experience, so I'm sure we'll get into that. How are you doing today, Gary?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Thanks for having me on.
No, thanks for joining. I'm glad we were able to make this work. Me and Sam got into your work thanks to Mark, and we've been listening to some of your stuff. So I'm really excited that you're able to join us tonight.
Yeah, cool. I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Well, let's start with, I guess, the big one on the wall, the near-death experience. I don't, I feel like our show is slowly becoming near-death experience show because we've had
Mhm.
like 3 in the past month or so. But tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, mine happened about 5 years ago. I was at work and it was just a normal day at work, and then I had a really major epileptic seizure. And during that seizure, what I remember anyway, and it's hard to recall these things because when you're recalling them through the filter of human senses and human language. So it's a very limited interpretation that people can give on this subject, or any type of form when you're kind of dealing with like outside consciousness. So what I experienced, at least through the filter of my brain, was that I was in this center of like blackness, and there was like colors moving around me. And but what really stuck out though was the feeling of peace. There was no more suffering. There was no more pain. There was no more response. I was completely aware. I knew what was happening or knew where I was somehow, and it felt like home. It felt like this is where I came from. I didn't encounter any beings or loved ones or anything like that. It was just this experience of blackness and peace. And I mean, the technical term for it, I believe, is like a black light near death experience, because there's different types of near death experiences that people have, which I can definitely get into as we go deeper into this conversation. But yeah, that happened. And when I woke up in the ambulance, and I was mad that I woke up. I was like, damn, it felt so good. It was great. And about a week later, I received a book in the mail on what was it? Time paradoxes, and it came from Oxford University or Oxford Press, and the date on the receipt was 6 months in the future. So I had actually taken a picture of the book and the receipt and posted it on Facebook, so it would be time stamped. And you can still go back and see it. I repost it every now and then just to prove that I received this book from the future. Now, most people will say, "Oh, it's a misprint on the receipt or whatever." Like whatever. My way of connecting it is that maybe during my near-death experience, that my consciousness entered a future version of myself that maybe was doing some type of research on time travel and found a way to send myself the book into the past as a reminder. So that was what happened. And then out of that, though, it's what happens afterwards for me with the experience that uh, really changed things. Is the integration period, which I mean, it's been 5 years now since that happened, and it still affects me. And I'm still processing it, because, like, again, I think the human mind is really limited in what we can do and what we can think about and what we can perceive.
Right, we're kind of conditioned by our little, I don't know, I wouldn't say century, but we're conditioned by society, I would say, more or less, of what we think we know, I suppose. You were talking a little bit about blacklight and differences between NDA. What causes that? Is it something in the brain? Is it a different chemical?
I
Do you
don't think
know,
it's
like,
any of those things. One of the things that happened after I finished, had this experience and got all this, I came up with the idea of starting the podcast. And I've always been interested in the paranormal. I've always been interested in the occult. And I had just started listening to podcasts, and it was COVID-19, so there was really nothing to do. So I started this podcast called Everything Imaginable. And while doing the podcast of Everything Imaginable, I've got to interview quite a few really important people in the world of near-death experience, people like PMH Atwater, Eben Alexander from Harvard University. So I've really dove deep into the topic. And what I think happens, or after doing these interviews, I would say almost everybody agrees that a near-death experience is like tailored to the individual. Like whatever is going to transition you over to the other side, whatever is best suited for your belief systems, whatever is going to not jar your nervous system to the max, whatever's going to make it a more gentle experience is what you're going to experience during that transition. Because a lot of what I remember, and I think other NDEers remember, is it's a transitionary phase. I still think that there's a deeper level beyond it, like a level of absolute pure consciousness. But what we experience, like as people, is like that. It's just a surface of a near-death experience, and what makes sense to me is that it's going to be made so a person's going to go over easily, so it's not as a horrible experience, because nobody wants to die and have it be a negative experience. And I don't think the universe that created all this wants that for us. I think we're here to learn lessons, but when we hit that point of death and the time for transition, it's meant to go smoothly. So I think if you're a Christian, you might meet Jesus or something like that, if that's what's going to make it easier for you. If you're Muslim, you might meet Allah. I don't know. You know what I mean? But I think, some people meet relatives. Some people will meet their parents to help bring them over to the other side. Other people meet angels. But it's whatever it is that's going to help the individual. But I don't think it has anything to do with brain chemicals or the brain shutting down or even a collective consciousness at that point. I think at that point still it's just it's a movement of energy. And whatever way is going to get that energy through the quickest is what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, actually, I can relate to experiences that I was told when my great grandmother was passing away. There was a couple times where I guess she was probably close, but she said my great grandfather wasn't there. And so she came back. And then the day that she passed, she said he was there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the day. And so, yeah, like you said, maybe it's whatever helps people feel calm and
Yeah.
pass
Like
over
one of the
peacefully.
experiences like I had, like I did hospice for both of my parents, but my dad, I had him at home and it was taking forever. So one of the things that would happen was I put a baby monitor in his room so I could keep track of him and check on him, because I couldn't be with him all the time. But he was constantly having conversations with dead relatives. I could hear him on the baby monitor talking to my mom or talking to his dad or his mom. And I think that's what it was. Like I think like those actual energies were coming to him, trying to make him feel comfortable enough to transition.
No, and it makes a lot of sense, NDE near death experiences, a lot of people have talked about. So there's got to be something behind them, right? They're not just out there happening for the hell of it, right?
Now it opens the door to a whole lot of weird stuff. Like, it for me anyway, it's opened up a door for, being able to perceive an entirely different reality, really.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit during that you were interested in like paranormal and the occult and stuff like that. What was something that kind of got you down that path or piqued your interest? Was it a movie or a book or something like that?
I started when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. And my mother had some relatives in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. And I remember going to visit them. And I remember one night we went to go visit some aunt that I'd never met before. And she read tarot cards, and she did it in the kitchen. She threw out put on a cloth on the table and read the cards for my mom. And I was completely fascinated by it, and I guess it seemed familiar to me. And, and I had to ask my mom after that, I said, can I learn how to do that? Could you get me some of those cards? And she did. And it started like out with reading tarot cards. And then there was a book, I forget what the name of it was. I think it was somebody Eden wrote. It was like back then, it was like, mid 80s. I didn't have Amazon or anything, so I had limited access to, knowledge for the occult. But anyway, there was this book on tarot, and at the end of the book, there was a chapter on Kabbalah. And when I read that too, it really clicked with me. Like, wow, that really seems familiar, and it really sounds like it made sense. I was like, yeah, that makes sense as a structural format for the universe. I was thinking like this as a kid, I'm like, 10 or 11 years old reading this stuff and thinking it made sense. And that's really where it started was with the tarot.
Yeah, I've done a little bit with tarot. Our buddies Josh and Johnny did it a little bit, so I kind of watched and learned from them when they did it, just so I could get a little bit knowledge. And yeah, the occult's something we haven't gotten into a lot on our show, even though our buddy Andrew, his uncle's the one that kind of brought Wicca to the USA. Like if you look up Ray Buckland, that's
Yes.
a great uncle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. At some point we'll have to do a show with you and him, and you guys can chit chat and talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be pretty fun.
Well, as far as like paranormal, what do you consider the paranormal? Because me and Sam kind of have this conversation a lot of what we consider paranormal and not. So what would you consider paranormal topics?
I would almost consider at this point nothing is paranormal. Everything is normal. Paranormal is normal. Supernatural is natural. These are things that I think maybe during the Industrial Revolution or something like that, as we went through that phase, we lost touch with our intuition. And now we're starting to kind of reconnect with that. But what I think it is, and this also is backed up a lot by quantum physics, and entanglement and things like that. I believe that everything is consciousness. I don't necessarily believe that this reality is real. At the very least, it's incomplete. That what you and I are perceiving is limited through a whole bunch of filters. So that's why I say that in the beginning, when it comes to the near-death experience, I'm still perceiving it through these filters. So I'm limited in what I can describe in it, or anybody can describe. But yeah, so this reality is definitely not, I don't think it's real. And there's so much science behind it. Like, and I think because what it does, it is non-local consciousness is what I'm saying. I'm talking about like consciousness we equate with something in our minds, our bodies, things like that. Well, what I'm saying is consciousness is not local. I'm saying that consciousness is being projected from somewhere else, and we as people are an expression of that consciousness that has forgotten what it is. Like it's like we're living inside a dream, and the dream was dreaming a dreamer, and the dreamer was dreaming a dreamer, and eventually the dreamer forgets that it's dreaming and believes that everything is real. And I think that's the situation that we're in.
Right. I think we've all had dreams, at least, where it's so real you forget that it's a dream, or you wake up and you're like, whoa. Yeah. Well, you talked about the Industrial Revolution, and I know around that time spiritualism was getting big, and there was a lot of like hucksters and charlatans and stuff. Do you think that also helped kind of get people away from that? Like it scared people or had people lose faith in it?
I think no, I don't think there were hucksters, truthfully. I don't think people like Madame Blavatsky and the people that were doing the seances, Aleister Crowley, I don't think any of them were. I think those people were the real deal. I think at that time they had to squash it because if people knew it was real, it would make them harder to control and make them go to work every day for money. If people know that reality is not real and you can manifest whatever you want through your use of consciousness and whatever paradigm that you decide to live through, why are you going to go to work every day and work like a slave? So they had to squash it.
Right. If you didn't have to go to work every day, I don't think so many people would. I know.
No, they don't.
Yeah, Mr. Mr. Crowley, as the song goes, right? Very interesting man himself. Even outside of like the spiritual portion, like mountaineering and all these adventures he went on. I think he was like a spy at one point as well. Just very, very interesting guy, I think.
Yeah, yeah. He liked his image,
Hmm.
but he was also really smart. You know, a lot of people like he claimed himself to be a reincarnation of another earlier magician named I don't know if I pronounced it right, Eliphaz Levi. He wrote this book called Transcendental Magic and Ritual. Great book and way ahead of its time.
Yeah, it's one we gotta check out here. I try. I get through about $4 a month, but I can only get through so many. There's so many options anymore. And Sam, I know I have a bad habit of just hijacking these conversations. I'm going to let you go now before I.
My question is because I've had kind of UAP or UFO experiences. What is your thoughts on UFOs, UAPs, both physical and non-physical entities?
They're real. I've done so many interviews on UFOs, and I've talked to quite a lot of people that I've interviewed have told me things off the air and have also shown me certain evidence and have given me certain experiences that not only is it I believe it's real. It's obviously something too that the government has known about for a long time. And one of the funny things that I also think is like the fact that you even asked that question, you know, is kind of like funny because people always talk about disclosure, right? And I'm like, man, all you have to do is turn the History Channel on at any time and there's a UFO show on. Like, what more disclosure do you want? It's just that people don't want to accept the reality.
Yeah, that is a big part of that. Another one would be on portals to other dimensions because we had an experience where we kind of passed through like a bubble is the way I kind of explain it, or like a force field
Mhm.
that kind of slowed time. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on those.
Yes, yeah, I think it's all real. And I've also another one too. I believe the government knows, you know. And again, I think they're trying to tell people. If you watch a show like Skinwalker Ranch, I mean, what do you think they're investigating there? In fact, they say it. They say, "Oh, I think there's a wormhole here." You know, they don't know if it's a natural occurrence. I don't think, or what's causing it, but they know that they exist and they know that beings come in and out of them. And again, all this is possible, I think, because of the way reality really is structured. It's not something that we learned, at least I didn't learn it as a kid, you know. Like when I was a kid, I learned about science through traditional physics, like there's an atom and then there's the neutron and there's protons and electrons spinning around the neutron, you know, and it looks like a little planet, like a little solar system, and then you connect these things together and you get solid matter. You know, now we know differently. Now we know that the 99% of it, there is no matter, that there's just energy, and really what it seems to be is just information. You know, it seems like atoms and all these things that exist, the protons, neutrons, uh, you know, the Higgs boson, all these, but Higgs boson, I'm sorry, are all just packets of information. So, you know, and that's kind of what I think this is. Again, like when we describe it as a dream, or even a dream, like what is a dream? Dream is really just information. It's just a story. You know, there's no solidity, there's no matter to it. It's just this like concentrated thoughts that appear real. And that's kind of what I think this is. This is like a concentration of energy that's manifesting, and it just appears real, but it's really not real, you know. And I think we can tool with it too a little bit, you know. And one of the things I like to have done, and I'll suggest to people, if you think what I'm saying is a bunch of bunk or whatever woo-woo stuff, sit down with a pen and paper and write down how many unexplainable things have happened to you in your life, and then think realistically, statistically, you know, like, is it normal for all that many unexplainable things to happen to one single person in such a short amount of time? Probably not. And that's because the impossible really is possible.
Right. Well, and I think I read somewhere that the human mind can't create a face, so every face you see in a dream, you've seen somewhere,
Mhm.
which is
Yeah, I've
weird
heard
because there's like people like in dreams that you feel like you really know, and you're like, I don't know who that was when you wake up.
that.
Yeah, there's that too.
I don't know if I believe that, because I do think that the dream state is another reality, and one of the ways that we get into that too, and again, science kind of backs this up a bit. It's also been used by the government, like the use of binaural beats to drop the brain down into an alpha state so people could do remote viewing. And I mean, I've actually taken a remote viewing class. One of my guests was David Morehouse, and he wrote this book called Psychic Warrior, and he had written the handbook for remote viewing for the CIA. And he allowed me to take one of his courses. And again, it works. It works. And this is something that the government knows about. Works. It's really, reality is not what we think it is.
Yeah, remote viewing is interesting. Sam and I kind of touched upon it when we were in Roswell because they filmed The Men Who Stare at Goats there.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because that's a whole actual program that they were, doing. And you feel like if the government's investing money in it, it's got to have something to it. They're not just throwing money at it to throw money at it.
And
We
I think,
hope, right?
imagine, and the stuff that we know now is old news. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? The reason I know it, and the reason I was able to take a course on it, because it's such out of date information now that the government doesn't really care if the public has it or not. So I can only imagine what they have now.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's in 60 years.
Yeah, no, we've kind of pondered that idea too, because like our buddy Alan lived on the reservation in Arizona and saw the Phoenix Lights when he was a kid.
Oh, wow.
And so we always talk about UFOs and we're like, well, they could be aliens, they could be government, because look how long it takes us to get like the disclosed airships that we have now, all the stealth bombers.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
it's very fascinating to really dig into that and be like, I don't know. I don't, it could be us from the future. Who
So what
knows?
do you think, man? What do you think this reality is?
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, you're doing this. You're a paranormal guy, so obviously you're curious. And if you're curious, you must have a hypothesis.
I don't know if I've made a hypothesis about like the reality. Uh, it's weird because a lot of times you see time repeating itself, which is odd. Like certain events, maybe different names, but very similar events will always happen at
Hmm.
certain intervals. So that's interesting. A lot of my paranormal curiosity came from ghosts and spirits that we'd see in the house I grew up in. And it happened to anyone that came in the house. It wasn't just us, and we've stayed in contact with the neighbors, and the 3 or 4 families I've come after have all experienced similar things. So that made me feel better. I was like, well, I'm not crazy. That's a good thing. But yeah, we've talked about like, the whole computer theory, like this is kind of like The Sims, or, this is a simulation. And, you know, I don't know, because for a while there, it was kind of taught that like the Big Bang was like the creation of everything.
Hmm.
But now I know science is saying like, well, actually, it all folded in on itself, then it came back out. So it seems more like a heartbeat.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting thing. Sam, what about you?
I mean, came up and kind of tackling a couple different theories. Like one was being like we're in some sort of like matrix just because of sometimes there's just certain things that happen that you're just like, that doesn't like that came out of nowhere, or that wasn't there before, or like just notice things that like tend to like glitch at moments, or at least I've seen some things that have glitched at moments. And so it always made me question, but then also um I've also thought of it as like a kind of a preparation, or like a test, or like something that's like putting you through some certain scenarios to see like how you would react to it. And then if you fail, it puts that scenario back into your like into existence to see if you've learned from it, or if you still make the same mistakes or something like that. And that's another thing that I have started to like look into and like think or like see, at least in the way I'm viewing things. And
Yeah.
also just it's about experiences and like I don't know. It's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, like you both mentioned, like sort of something that I think too is that there's a pattern to it. You know, there's a certain pattern to this reality that you see things constantly over and over and over again. You're like, well, why do I keep seeing this? You know, why does this keep appearing? You know, one of the things I think like is like remember I talked about the information packets. I think like those information packets are like some type of three-dimensional sacred geometry that holds the pattern together, kind of like DNA. Just like DNA holds our entire makeup together, but really all it is information in the form of geometry, you know? And I think everything kind of works that way. You just have to look for it and you'll see it.
Right. It's kind of like the God ratio, where everything in the universe is by this certain ratio, and
Mhm.
shells spiral by a galaxy. And that is a very interesting thing to be like. Well, I wonder why all of it looks the same. There's got to be a reasoning behind that. It feels to me, it feels like everything couldn't be so precise from nothing, right? Because then it'd be kind of chaos. Where it feels kind of refined here.
Yeah, there's definitely laws, you know. I mean, that's what they would call it in science. There's laws of nature, laws of the universe, you know. But what are those laws? You know, they're laws of information to guide how things should be. You know, I mean, laws in our country, they're written down, they're information.
Right?
You know, the
Written
Constitution
somewhere.
is a set of laws, and they're
Yeah.
written down, and then we follow them. So
Most
why
of
would
us,
this
right?
be any different? We're just following the pattern.
Yeah. Well, when we follow laws pretty much every day, you got to go to work and they have, rules you got to follow while you're there. And yeah. What about like cryptids? What are your thoughts with cryptid beings? Are they more like Sam? I know brought up portals and stuff. Are they more interdimensional? Are they flesh and bone? Are they both? Like, how's that going?
I'm gonna have to go with both. You know, um, I do think the majority of them probably are interdimensional. You know, I do think that maybe Bigfoot is probably some type of human, uh, whether it's a human that's existing on a dimension or vibration that's very close to ours and is moving through and maybe not even knowing the moving through in and out of dimensions. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I mean, some of them seem like a little bit hard to believe, like things like Dogman or something like that. But even when I think about that, you know, like those legends of like a werewolf go back forever. And I used to think too that a lot of this stuff was like an analogy or mythology, ways of to explain human nature. Like what, like the idea of like a wolf man is a way to explain man's darker side or animal nature, something like that. You know, I didn't take these things literally, but I do think they're literal to some extent. And another possible cause is maybe we're creating them. Maybe because so many people believe it that we're manifesting it. Because I think the reality that we're into is interactive, you know, and it responds to our requests. So I think sometimes if a person starts thinking like, oh, I'm curious about Bigfoot, I wonder, you know, what that is. I think sometimes we can actually manifest a Bigfoot in our own reality and have that experience.
Sort of like how, we've talked about poltergeists on here and how they're like physical manifestations of how people are feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so you're saying it's kind of like that with like Bigfoot, like enough people are believing in it that's like creating these cryptids.
I'm saying it's a possibility. I'm saying all these possibilities. In fact, one of the things I think is in my model of idea of the way I view the universe is if one thing exists, then every other possibility has to exist. You can't have it any other way. If there is one thing, there has to be everything. And
Mm.
that includes the things that we are talking about. And that's why I don't think they're like supernatural or paranormal. They're just other possibilities, and because they're possibilities, they have to exist. Because if we're smart enough to think about, if we're smart enough to notice these things and find these things and try to explain these things, and we're not even that smart of a creature, I'm sure we're just skimming the surface of what actually can exist and what's actually possible. Just like people 100 years ago couldn't ever imagine that you and I would be doing a podcast on a computer.
Yeah, there's so many things, you look back and we read a lot of historical books and you're just like, wow, life would have been a lot different had they had this set of technology or this thing, because like it wouldn't go on. Me and my buddy David were kind of talking about that with the Colorado Springs axe murders or Jack the Ripper. Had they had just DNA testing back then, they would have caught the guy. It's amazing how much technology changes the world. Maybe not for the better all the time, but it does.
And it improves it too, because of certain scenarios, they create new things like all the plane crashes. It's made planes as safe as they can be today until something faults, and then that's like a new thing to figure out how to prevent that from happening. So,
and then there's the nuclear bomb.
yeah, that one's a that one. Yeah, even that creator knew. He was just like, "Oh no, what have I done?"
Well, yeah, Oppenheimer with the atomic bomb back then. Yeah, it's interesting. Did you see the Oppenheimer movie?
I didn't yet.
Yeah, we got to talk about it here at some point. Maybe we'll have you on. We can talk about it with you.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll watch it. Come on and talk about it.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, what about I watched one podcast where you were kind of delving into. Someone was asking you about conspiracies. What are your take on like conspiracy theories?
I don't like them.
Okay.
That is it. I don't like them. Like I said, I started this podcast in 2019 when QAnon was huge. I don't know. I may have even interviewed Q. I'm not sure. And I never released the episode because it was such a sketchy thing for me to even try to do. I just wanted to see if this guy was real and get side of his head, and try to figure it out. If he was Q, I will say, I really feel bad for the guy because really he was just an angry, upset, grieving father taking out his frustration in a really strange way, But I'm just not a fan of them. I don't like negativity. I think the world has enough things to make it scared, for podcasters and other people to create more fear. I'm not saying that all the things in these theories are not true, because like I just said earlier, I think everything could possibly be true and probably is. But I also say on the other side of that coin too, we get to choose, like if we can manifest a Bigfoot, with our consciousness, we can also manifest something really good to help us out. And if we're just all we're thinking about is negative conspiracy theories, then that's what we're creating. If we think about something else, like achieving a higher level of consciousness and reconnecting to each other and reconnecting to nature and reconnecting to the source, I think that's a better way to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sam knows my thoughts on conspiracies. They used to be kind of interesting, maybe not fun back in the day, but it seems like anymore everything's a conspiracy. Like we've seen them with like the Titanic whole switch conspiracy. And I'm like, well, if you just look at the ship, you can tell it's the Titanic and not the Olympic based on design. But
yeah, I would say the only one I find really interesting is the moon, because I think the moon is really an anomaly, because the way it's measured is like exactly like 400, I don't know, 4,000 miles from us, and the particular distance from the sun, so it blocks out the sun perfectly during an eclipse. I find that really interesting, and I think that might be part of the patterns that we're talking about. Because the patterns that you and I were just talking about, I think those patterns also exist in the celestial forms, and I also think that maybe ancient civilizations knew about these patterns too, and things like that show up in like the measurement of the pyramid being like the same measurement as the speed of light in cubits. Like some of these things are just too odd to be coincidence. But they are occurrences of a pattern, though.
Right. Yeah. A lot of times with those like ancient civilizations, it feels like maybe there's some stuff lost at some point, because there's some really interesting, just obviously structures being built. The pyramids are
What do
tallest
you guys
building.
think about Atlantis?
Uh, I've definitely seen some people that uh, would lead me to want to investigate certain parts of our Earth more. I'll say it that way. I don't know if I believe it 100%, but I'm like open to the possibility, you know?
I
How
think it
about you, Sam?
exists or existed, and it could like I don't know. I watched a show back in the day that like made me think of a different theory about Atlantis. That was Stargate actually, and Atlantis was actually on another celestial body
Mm-hmm.
than on Earth, but we just had access to it through like a portal essentially. And I was just like, that could be a very big possibility. But like it being in the ocean, I wouldn't be surprised because yes, we haven't explored all of it, and there's parts that a lot of us don't want to go, and there's probably reasons for that. One being it too big of depth, but also just I don't know, just assume that there's nothing there, but there actually could be something there. That's just like that one thing where like you're like mining for like gems or gold, and you just like stop at one point when you were like so close to like finding something.
See, I kind of assume that they've already found it, they already know about it. That they know the history. One of the things I find interesting about Atlantis is the story didn't just originate from because it came from Egypt, and apparently like this guy Solon the Greek got it from Egypt and told it to Plato, but it also existed in other ancient texts, not just those that we are familiar with, or the Edgar Casey version of it. It does show up in the Sumerian text and some of the Veda texts. They all sort of describe this advanced society. And they also seem to all agree that this advanced society was one that had access to the entire globe, which other societies at the time didn't have.
Well, see, if you had to like place a guess, where would you think Atlantis might be?
That is a good question. And I don't really know. I mean, the Bimini Road is one of the ones that a lot of people talk about and say that might be Atlantis. I think it might be in the Atlantic. I think that would be the obvious place for Atlantis. I mean, why did we name the Atlantic the Atlantic?
Valid point.
Like another funny question is like, why do we call the Earth the Earth? Who named Earth Earth? Like, if you ever Google it, you're not really going to find an answer to that question.
I just thought of it. What if Atlantis is in Antarctica, and that's why governments are there and not civilians?
The Antarctica, I have a guest that has come on two guests that have come on that said they've been to the base in Antarctica. One I believe, and he's a friend of mine, and the other guy I do not believe. But there is a base in Antarctica, definitely, and there's definitely structures there. I think the pyramids there. I think there was a civilization there. Was it related to it? Probably. It was probably another outpost of Atlantis. Could have been.
Yeah, I know another kind of big thing recently with Atlantis is being in the Sahara, with the eye of the Sahara,
Mm-hmm.
which is an interesting thing because based on some of the descriptions, you're like, yeah, I guess I could see that being it. Of course, it's inland, so that would definitely make it different.
There's shipping, but one of the things I think though is they had different stations around the world. Like I said, they could travel, and one of the things that Plato describes is the way Atlantis was set up like a city of spirals, with shipping lanes in between the different structures, and you find that design in like Stonehenge. And think about looking down on Atlantis. Or there's a place here in America called Port Poverty in Louisiana. If you Google it and you look at it, it looks just like Atlantis. And there's like other places all around the world that contain that same design. And it also shows up in crop circles. It can't be coincidence. Again, patterns.
Right.
Yeah.
What about like Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah. And they don't even know how old Göbekli Tepe is, and they haven't even started. They thought that Göbekli Tepe was just that one, I don't know, like 3 or 4 square miles that they had started digging up, but now they're discovering it's like much huger. It's like a gigantic complex, and they've only like uncovered like not even like 1/10 of it yet. We have a lot to learn. Another like cool thing, like what do you guys think? Do you think there's the Library of Alexandria underneath the Sphinx in Egypt? Have you ever heard that one?
I wouldn't doubt it.
Because we know at least with the Sphinx that the design was changed. The head that we see now isn't the original head. They kind of carved it. So I mean, it's possible, and I think it's either really hard or almost impossible to get underneath the Sphinx because there is the little crevasse. Like I should say, to get the paperwork to go under it. Like not like actually impossible, but like
yeah, you give me
legality.
a shovel, I'll get under there.
Well, what about speaking of like Egypt? I guess what do you think with the pyramids? What were their function?
I think most of these megalithic structures were a part of a global energy network that somehow sent energy. And I don't think it just sent energy. It probably sent energy. It probably provided energy. It probably acted as a communication, just like our telephone poles. They carry all kinds of different signals on a telephone pole. I think there was some kind of global wireless system that somehow ran off of natural force from the ground, like some kind of geo force, that's coming out of the earth. Like maybe they were somehow harvesting energy from the movement of tectonic plates or some kind of heat that's coming out from the bottom of the earth. I don't know what, or magnetic fields that were naturally existing. I don't know exactly, or maybe some combination of all the above. If you take all the megalithic structures around the world, maybe each one was trying to harvest some kind of transmit energy in some form, because there's so many, like it says, like Göbekli Tepe, there's the pyramids, there's those spheres in South America, there's the pyramids, the Aztec pyramids, there's the stuff at Malta, there's so many of these structures all around the world. We have the Serpent Mound here in the United States. There's, it's crazy how much of this stuff is around on the planet, and we don't know anything about it or where it came from or who built them and why. But to me, what makes sense is that it was probably some form of energy source, some type of communication, and who knows, maybe it was even teleportation.
Do you think it's similar to some of the theories behind Tesla's work?
Yes. Yeah, I think Tesla had probably some type of contact with extraterrestrials through meditation, and that's how he got out of his ideas. I think that's common through most geniuses. I think, again, like that, it just fits with the idea of non-local consciousness. You just take some of those filters off and you start getting these great ideas.
It always seems like the people coming up with the ideas are so much further ahead than the rest of the world at that time. Tesla, even today, some of his stuff is so far ahead of what we're doing still.
We're catching up.
Yeah, we're getting there.
And again, I said too, like we're like 60 years behind you and I from what they actually have.
Right.
There's probably some smarter guy than Tesla who's, creating stuff we don't even know about it.
Right. Well, so we've gone into like Area 51 a lot on the channel. Or I shouldn't say a lot, but we've talked about it. And there was a hand scanner that Bob Lazar said he used to get in.
Yeah.
And it was also used in Close Encounters, I think, right?
Yes.
Do you think obviously Hynek worked with Spielberg on Close Encounters. Do you think there's truth in that. Obviously, like that's pretty
Absolutely.
solid. Yeah.
Like I don't own many movies, but Close Encounter is one of them that I own. And yeah, absolutely. I believe um Spielberg definitely got some of that inside information. And again, like I mentioned earlier, like people keep asking about disclosure, it's been spoon fed to people for years now, since the 70s, since the 50s, it's been spoon fed to the public.
Mhm.
And I think Spielberg was one of those people that was given information and given permission to do some of that, put some of that out there to see how people respond, to see what people react, see what people will say, to see how it changes people's paradigms of reality and if people adopt those new paradigms.
Yeah, no, definitely a pretty influential one there. I know a day the Earth stood still was another one that the government was not too fond of when it came out, but that's one of my favorites. I guess maybe just because I grew up watching it when I was little, so I really enjoy it. But I really like that one.
What do you guys think about extraterrestrials? What do you think about the footage from the Nimitz? Do you think that footage is real? Do you think that the government put it out on purpose? Do you think that's part of disclosure? And what about Luis? What is his last name?
Elizondo.
Elizondo. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of it is real, but like some of it is obviously faked for other purposes. But I think there's definitely some that are like just too. I don't know. There's like too. It's too inconsistent with some of like the ones that they are clearly being like trying to be something, but it's not. But there's some that are just like too unexplainable. Is the word I was looking for. Too unexplainable for it to not be real or for it to be fake. Because like I've seen from like I haven't seen physical beings, but from seeing like crafts or what I assumed were crafts just by like how they did stuff. Seeing some of those, I'm like, no, that definitely could be something, and like others that are just like, no, like there's some that are definitely I definitely believe.
But you've seen one yourself?
I think I've seen a couple. The reason I say I think is just I didn't get like a very close visual of them, but like just the way that it showed itself was just something that I couldn't explain. So I believe that they were crafts. Like there was one mid daylight, it was just like a super metallic object and it just like sat still in the sky for like 30 plus minutes. And I went to go get binoculars to look closer and then it was just gone. And then another one was at nighttime. This one, I still don't. This one is still, it was like wild to me. But like I was up in Keystone here in Colorado and we were just out kind of above some apartments just playing music, like having like a bonfire and like my buddies were out there playing music, so we brought up a generator and just was like playing music, and then all of a sudden there were just like these 8 lights that appeared over above the forest, like perfect circles. They were like white but like had some like blue translucent in there, and me wearing glasses, like all the lights from like the road or any of that had like that flare on these, but these lights, zero flare, perfect circles, and like looked like they were rotating around. And then me and this other person saw it, and like some other people, and we were just like looking at that and just being like, that is weird. Like, are you seeing that too? Because like this is interesting. And then we just see it disappear. And then we just like sat there looking out there like that was kind of strange. And then like all of a sudden you would see like this orange like flash that like looked like a potential like a fire was starting, but like it was just like this little flash in the forest. And then it went away. And then like a couple minutes later, or like I don't know how many minutes later, but after a couple of minutes, you just see like a car light turn on and they like start to drive away, but like the way they were driving was kind of strange. And so it was just like, I don't know if I witnessed an abduction or like someone coming to visit in a vehicle or something. That one is still to this day, like I just don't know how to explain it, because like usually any sort of light even my light right here, I see reflections off of it, but like those lights were just perfect circles and like zero reflection. So I just can't explain that one.
Hmm.
And my buddy was in the forest going to the restroom, and like he saw something come down through the clouds and then just like pop back up like earlier that day. And he talked to me about that later, because like he was playing a set at the time, and like I tried to get his attention, but like he was kind of in the DJ mode, just like putting on like the next songs and tracks, so he didn't see that one, but like he saw another one earlier.
What do you guys think about abductions?
I mean, we've definitely heard some stories. We've listened to Travis Walton because we've met him a couple times in Roswell. So, I mean, it's possible. You know, Betty and Barney Hill were about to get a video that we're doing on it. So I don't know. Some of them, you know, I think all of them you got to go in kind of skeptical, but then listen open mindedly and then make your conclusions from there. But I think, like with anything, there's real ones and not real ones, you know?
I mean, I think some people experience it as like them being taught or shown a path on which to help enlighten other people, and like others are probably taken to like scare them out of something or into a better path potentially, like they were spiraling down the incorrect path or something that wasn't helpful, and so maybe some of them might be a scared thing. I don't really know.
I think some of them are good. I've interviewed a lot of people who've had abduction or experiencers. I definitely believe that it happens, you know, and I think it happens more often than not. I also think the ones that we hear about where people are frightened and being experimented on and laying on the cold table and things like that, I think those might be us.
Like the government doing something.
Yeah, I think it's just, you know, military messing with people.
Well, what about like cattle mutilations? Because me and Sam have done some episodes, but I think some of them are like government trying to cover up for something they did, you know, and test the cows and see what's been going. Like, did it get it into the plants or the water? Like, let's test with the cows.
Yeah,
you know, that would make sense, except that then they would just, you know, I mean, it's not that hard to breed a farm of cows and have your own cows to experiment on. You don't need to go out and mess with a farmer's cow. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure they can have their own cows on a military base to mess around with and keep things a lot quieter. So I think the cows, I think that's an interdimensional phenomenon. I think something's coming out of another dimension and doing it. And I can't tell you why. It's strange, that's for sure.
Right. I'm trying to think of the one that
parts, like the mechanical face or like stuff like eyes and such.
Yeah, they
like,
take out the eyes and around the lips and around the anus, and they drain the blood. It's really strange, you know. Like I wonder, like maybe it's some kind of animal that's comes through another dimension, you know, and that's just how it would feed in the other dimension, but it's doing it here, and then it jumps back to the other dimension, and then we're just left with this weird, unexplainable cow carcass.
Yeah, I know Sam was doing. How many were abducted in that big case? We haven't got to it yet, but it's like 60 or 70 or something over a time span. There was a good amount, I remember.
It was like 60 to 70 cows on like different scenarios, or like over, I think it was like 4 years.
Well, that's a lot of cows.
A bunch.
It's a lot of money. You know?
Yeah, I just watched like a documentary with like I think it was Linda Moulton Howe on the cow mutilations all the way through the 70s up till now.
Yeah, I think the one that he was doing was in the 70s. We did another one where I think it was like 3, pretty close to us, but it was just kind of like a one-off scenario. It was interesting because it was really near to us at a time in the 60s where you think people would see something.
What do you think they are?
Me? I don't know. That's why we're out here looking for it, you know?
I mean, I could see it being an animal potentially, or like some sort of animal, or just beings being confused by like how we were getting food from this and just are curious themselves on like the function of those animals.
Hmm.
Just because cows are kind of interesting. They have two different stomachs, super gassy, and just they're unique creatures in their own. And so I'm not surprised that that's one that they would pick. Because like if I was coming to a different place and just saw something like weird and just like, what is this, or like experiment on things, because like they've found like coyotes that have been like mutilated and like other animals, so it's probably them just trying to figure out the species potentially.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's Snippy, the horse that we saw, the skeleton of
Hmm.
the horse that was like killed or abducted and killed by the UFO. It
What
was
do you think the strangest species on the planet is?
outside of people.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, there's lots of interesting, like octopuses are super interesting. They're so smart and flexible, and like,
That's actually my pick.
is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. Because
that
their
one's.
DNA is really strange too.
mm, yeah, those and
Jellyfish.
cuttlefishes too, with their just like the way they can just change colors and hide. You know, with their camouflage is super cool.
Yeah, I would say jellyfishes. Like,
Jellyfish. Yeah.
they're real strange.
Yeah.
Especially with
It's
those
funny,
ones you
like
get in
how it's all
colony.
it's sea creatures that are strange,
Mhm.
Sea
know.
creatures are real strange.
Yeah, they're strange. You ever hear of the aquatic ape theory?
Yeah, with the mermaids and stuff.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Do you think there's anything to it?
I think so.
I mean,
I'd
it
probably be
makes
on the
sense.
opposite one, but
I mean, the aquatic apes could explain all UFOs and all this stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like if they're all living in the ocean, and they have higher technology than us, they could just do what they want.
well, I know that's a big thing towards the end of the second season of Project Blue Book was a lot of the underwater UFOs.
Hmm.
They were getting into that, and then they got canceled. So who knows? Maybe there's something to
Yeah,
it.
the USOs.
Yeah, because that's where the cliffhanger was. Like they went underwater, and then they're like, "Yeah, we're just going to cancel the whole series now. We're going in a different direction." But they still have Ancient Aliens on there, so I don't think they
Yeah.
are in a different direction.
Yeah, I don't know. I watched the first season of Project Blue Book. I didn't watch the second one, but I probably watched all 25 seasons or whatever it is of Ancient Aliens.
So did I, because it was on the History Channel when I was younger.
Yep.
That's what me and my cousin watched like every day.
Mhm.
Do you think the planet was seeded?
By like extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
I would say yes.
Yeah, I mean, even if you don't think it was just like aliens themselves doing it, it seems like life or bacteria for life or whatever, if you're just going down that route, came from somewhere else. You know, probably from meteorites hitting us.
I used to think what kills me on the meteoroid theories again were the position of the moon. It's I think the moon was definitely put in that position in order to create the ideal environment for life to flourish.
Yeah, I would agree. Just because of how much pull it has on like the ocean wave,
Hmm.
Well, it's
tide.
bigger than most moons.
Oh yeah, it's the moon. The
It's
moon
the
is
only
pretty
moon like that in our solar system.
Hmm.
true.
And we're in the Goldilocks zone,
Yeah.
just in the right place for life. Yeah. Some interesting theories. Well, talking about like creating life, AI has been a big topic, right? People
Mhm.
creating AI. What are your thoughts with AI? Do you think we're AI? Like, what's going on with AI in general?
We, I mean, in a roundabout way, yes, I believe we are AI, because I believe that we are the universe experiencing itself. So, from that kind of perspective, yeah, we are AI. We just don't know it. We just are like ignorant to what we are, so we can have these experiences as individual egos. Um, where AI is going to take us, I don't think it's going to be the end of us. I don't think it's going to destroy us. I don't think it's going to take over. In fact, I think AI can become a positive tool to help expand consciousness and help enlighten humanity if used properly. I mean, that's kind of how I've been trying to use it. You know, it's certainly great for that from that outside of human perspective. I love asking AI like spiritual questions and see what kind of answers it gives me. In fact, in one of my episodes, I did an interview with AI. I just asked ChatGPT these questions, and I cut and pasted the question and stuff into like this audio software and made an interview out of it.
Oh, that's super cool. I'll have to listen to that one. Yeah, no, I like AI in forms of research. It makes researching a lot easier because it'll be like, here's kind of everything we compiled. This is where you can find it. So instead of like traveling to 100 different libraries, you only have to go to a couple. So it definitely can be helped as used as a very helpful tool, like you said.
I don't know. AI is very interesting. Like, we've seen many reasons why it's super helpful, but then we've also seen many reasons why it could be very devastating too. Like, it's back and forth. I mean, it's at the point that we're making it, it's basically like its own consciousness. At this point, it's like its own separate entity.
Right. But I think that's how the universe works.
It's true.
I mean, if something seeded us, it created us, and then we create AI, and then AI eventually forgets its AI and starts creating its own stuff.
True.
And if we're going to go out and just do space exploration, we can't necessarily use our human bodies to do it either. We're going to have to use some type of AI, where we're going to have to create genetically modified human beings that are going to be capable of space travel.
This is very true.
Yeah, we just read a fictional book, but it's by Andy Weir. Project Hail Mary is what it's called. And they go on this journey to save the Earth because there's these like algae that's eating all the sun. And they have to use AI and AI robots to help them stay alive while they're making the transport and while they're in like a coma sleep, cryogenic sleep, whatever it is. So like you said, yeah, I think it could be used in that kind of stuff too to just help us collect data. Pretty much you think of drones and all the spacecraft that we've shot out, are kind of AI in a way.
Right. And we could use it to collect resources too. Like, imagine sending out like AI spaceships to out into the meteoroid belt to harvest resources like gold or whatever else we can get that we can't find here on Earth. We can use them to do that. I mean, it's much more efficient. It makes way more sense than trying to use humans.
No, I would agree.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a better way to get that kind of stuff. Humans are fragile beings and we don't have that great of a lifespan, especially if you look at other animals. There's a lot that live a lot longer than us. So we're fragile. We don't live a long time. AI doesn't really have all the fears, so it'll just keep doing the research in the way too. So yeah, like I said, it's a good tool. Well, let's before we wrap up, tell us a little bit more about your podcast for the listeners and what they can expect if they go over there and check it out.
All right. Well, my podcast is called Unity Manifest. It's formerly Everything Imaginable. If you search for either, you'll find it. When I was doing Everything Imaginable, that's exactly what it was. I was covering everything that I could. Now that it's Unity Manifest, it's more focused on understanding consciousness and the source of consciousness and an idea of unity, because I believe that when we all kind of focus on this idea of consciousness, and that's where all this originates, maybe we'll stop being so judgmental towards each other if we realize that we're all the same, and even that, I think that pattern, it just shows up in people too, and the purpose of the podcast is really to try to make people aware that there's other paradigms available, different lenses to look at reality through than the ones that we've been taught growing up, either in school or through church or through TV, through our parents. There's a lot more to experience than what we were aware of. And I encourage people to listen to it. And I encourage people to experiment with their consciousness. There's nothing wrong with like trying meditation or binaural beats or drumming or even hallucinogenics. I mean, there are all these gateways into other forms of consciousness and other ways of experiencing reality that I feel like could be very beneficial to mankind. So yeah, Unity Manifest. Check it out. It's on all platforms, audio. I don't have much yet on YouTube on video right now. But the audio, I have over 600 episodes.
Sweet. Yeah, and people like binge watching things nowadays, so
Mhm.
definitely a good thing. We go on road trips all the time, so it's a good thing for us to pull up and listen to. So, Gary, thanks again for joining. Like we said earlier, you'll have to come back on. Maybe we'll do Oppenheimer. We'll talk about that movie. This has
Yeah.
been fun talking with you today.
All right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure been a pleasure being on. So used to being the host.
I get it. I get it. I've been on the flip side a couple times where people have us on, and I'm like, wait, what do I say? Do I talk to? No, I wait for them to.
Just start talking like a wolf. It'd be pretty cool. Also, I see your blacklight poster back there. I have that exact same one. That's
The
awesome.
mushroom one.
Yeah.
I thought it looked familiar, so I was like, where do I know that from?
Oh yeah, it's sitting right over there.
So once again, we want to say thank you to Gary for joining us on this awesome episode of Culz Interviews. Make sure to go help support him. Check out his show. We'll make sure to put all the links in the description below. But until next time, guys, for more Culz Interviews, click that link to your left. For more about us here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And let us know, was there a topic discussed tonight that you'd like us to expand on? Tell us in the comments below.